Hello, everyone. Good morning. How's it going? This is episode 11 of Voice First Design with My Cactus. And my name is Justin Jeffress, and I'm evangelist at Amazon. And I've got
Alison. I am a senior GUI designer at Amazon. I help third parties build awesome skills like this one.
Nice.
And I'm Joe Moyo. I am also a solutions architect at Amazon Alexa. And excited to talk about certification here.
Yes. All right. And, looks like Alison is, last week she was in her car, and this week she appears to be in a spaceship. She's got some interesting, like, roll-up door, and I'm not sure if those are screens behind you, but...
Oh man, this is actually my part-time home on the road. I haven't been on the road since we started the stream until, like I said, last week. I'm also on the Oregon coast. I've moved a bit farther south, and on Friday you will see me in Mendocino, California. I'll be in the Redwoods. So yes, this is my trailer. I've been living it part-time. It does look like a spaceship. It's great. That's one of the reasons I picked it out. So I'm coming to you from my trailer, and I'm actually trying to post a video on my Twitter right now of the full setup because it's just so ridiculous. I've got like the car idling outside with like a cell signal booster and stuff like that. So complete with Christmas lights even. So to be
So
festive. And
right.
then there might even be a dog in the mix at some point. She's right here as well. You might hear from her a bit today. She's a bit vocal. So
Right. So if you hear...
greetings from the Oregon coast for now.
if you hear, what sounds like Chewbacca, that's Allison's dog. Nope, right on cue.
My neighbor might make... Yep, that was lovely. My neighbor might make an appearance. Who knows what's going to happen? Sea monster. I don't know. I'm at the beach, so.
Nice. All right.
Anyway, we are so close to being done.
Yes, we're on episode 11 out of 12.
So far, because if anybody who's ever submitted a skill knows your work isn't done when you submit to certification.
Right. Well, in general, my rule of thumb with software is it's never done until you stop supporting it, right? Like,
Right.
Software is never done. And there's always things that you can do to improve. There's always features that you can think of to make the product better. And so, yeah, software isn't truly done. You're not truly done with it until you essentially end of life it and stop building on it. So,
Right.
Yep. All right. Oh, Joe, were you gonna say something?
So, let's...
No.
Okay. I thought I cut you off.
Oh, and now it's raining. So apologies for rain noise. I might mute in and out when I'm not talking. Just a lot going on here today. But so we finished a pretty deep dive on our development process last week, and that's after doing a pretty thorough review of the code that's there. And as a reminder, all of the storyboards, design assets, script, and the code are on our Git repo alexa.design/my-cactus. And you can continue following along at home. Although, come to think of it, we haven't written our skill description and stuff yet, so it's not in condition to submit to certification yet. But we'll talk about doing all that today.
We technically have one written. It just might not be up to appropriate standards.
Okay.
Hmm. Placeholder values. We want your input on that.
Awesome. Actually, let's put on the agenda because looking at the calendar, we're gonna have a quote unquote launch party, which means we just want to open up the beta to more testers and the people following along at home. But also, maybe we should chat about some of those odds and ends, because I know I struggle. I have a writing background. I have a journalism degree, and I still struggle writing a really catchy skill description that's gonna reel people in should they come into the skill store and see it from the skill store. So we really want to write a compelling description, and I think that might be worth addressing. We can talk about that in the next episode now that we mentioned it. And there are some requirements for that description. Yeah, we still have some odds and ends we have to do. So we'll tie those up next episode. But let's talk about preparing for certification, which prepare being the operative word there. We don't want to react necessarily to things that happen in certification. We want to be better prepared so we don't have to go through more rounds than is necessary. So it'll save you a lot of headaches to build some things into the design ahead of time, to think about certification early. And then Justin and Joe will have some things from a code standpoint to talk about as well. So, and yeah, again, if you're just joining me and you hear something in the background that sounds like Chewbacca while I'm talking, that would be my dog, upset that I am speaking to nobody in particular without bringing my friends over. She wants to play too. So that is a dog in the background, not Chewbacca. All right. Let's get to it. So a little bit of a reminder of what we're working with here. These are the storyboards. This is our full design for our skill that we implemented, with a couple of maybe notable exceptions in there that we haven't yet implemented yet. They fell out of scope because some other things took longer, but this is that. And there are some things that we can actually do in the design phase that we didn't address yet that prepare us for certification. And so we're going to talk about those early on. So another reminder, if you're new here, this is the way that we design the skill. You can go back in previous episodes and watch us build what we call these storyboards for the skill, which is what I handed off to Justin and Joe to start development. And it works backward from what our customer is going to say to our skill, what our player is going to say to our skill, the context that they're in, and then a contextually appropriate response. And we did that until we ran out of possible utterances and contexts, and that meant that we were done with the skill because we had a response written for most every feasible scenario. So that's what we're talking about with storyboarding. If you're just joining us, I would highly encourage you to go back and check out those episodes, check out the storyboards. So before we even start, we're gonna need to familiarize ourselves with some relevant requirements for skills and the way that they function. So this might require a little adjustment to scope. So you might be attempting something that has certain requirements that you're gonna have to build into your design. For example, help messages. You need to have at least one help message in your skill. Better yet, contextual help messages in several places, but that's a functional requirement. You just need to build that into your design. So as you can probably imagine, if you're aware of these things ahead of time, you're not playing catch up and rewrite when you're in certification or preparing for certification. So study those requirements ahead of time. Make a checklist of things that are relevant to you that you need to remember when you're building the design if you need to. I've done such a thing myself with other types of skills that had a lot of requirements, and we'll talk about those. Some have a higher bar of functional requirements or additional requirements and policy requirements to consider if it's a certain type of skill. So you're going to want to try to find all the relevant information up front just so you build it into your design to begin with. Also, if you're using some kind of Amazon API or certain tech that we have available, such a really good example is reminders. There are requirements for the way that you write your messages in reminders. You need to tell the person and repeat to the person at certain times when you'll remind them. You have to tell them how they can cancel or stop a reminder, or change a reminder. So just be aware and just familiarize yourself with what's there. So the more familiar with it you become, the more you know, the more you know.
And to that point, like, trying to like, there is a balance as to how much information that you can take in before you start actually, start with your design, because you could probably always find an excuse to go deeper on something to prevent you from building. But like you said, knowing in advance like what the requirements are is very, very important, because if you spend so much time developing and building and then you submit the certification only to find out that your core functionality, the core piece of what you do, violates policy, and then at that point you have to make a decision: do I rip all of that out of my skill? And if I do, is the skill still something that makes sense? Is it still something that would be a good product in the end? And so knowing in advance like what those policies are and what you can and can't do will help things go smoother in the end.
And much better to encounter that before you've written any code, right? Even before you've gone too deep onto the design and testing of that design, right? Hours of planning saves days of code.
Yep. It's true.
What is that, like an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure?
Yep.
same concept here. And to what extent it makes a difference, depending on the type of skill that you have. Like ISP, it's like essential to know that inside and out before you start designing, because there are so many gotchas and requirements. But anyway, we don't have ISP yet. So, go ahead.
Do we have any like what special considerations do we have for this skill, Allison?
Oh, so really it's the basics, and the basics are really like making sure the help messages are there, making sure your mic is opening, which we'll talk about those. And I think there really weren't any gotchas except for just your standard functional requirements. We've talked about reminders; those have some extra requirements and content requirements, but really there is nothing special for this skill. It's very straightforward, and it doesn't really use any API or anything like that. Although I would assume there are requirements around web API. Of course, number one, you have to be a game. That's really important to know before you start building for web API. That's an example of the core of your skill being changed by a requirement.
Yeah, that's certainly
yes.
Check, we are a game.
So really, we just have the normal functional requirements that every skill has to abide by, and the certification requirement of it needs to be a game. We have to categorize the skill as a game when we certify it.
Yep, and
correct,
if you
correct.
forget and you
yes, it is raining outside. Thank you, Justin, for pointing that out in the chat.
Yep.
Gotta love that Oregon coast. This is why I'm heading south today.
It's funny because we're up in Washington, Seattle area where it's basically infamous for rain, but it's not raining here right now, and it's raining on you, so it's overcast.
Oh, I've been wet and cold for 2 weeks now. I can't wait to get to California in the desert. Oh, so here in the design phase, so let's do a little preparation to begin with. Let's make sure we're not building a skill that isn't like just illegal in Alexa terms. Which let's assume that we've done that. Check. We are a game. We can use web API for games and such. So now once we're in the design phase, I like to go in at any point when I think I've finished at least a portion of a flow, or at least before I start a beta test. I want to make sure I self-audit possibly for some of these functional requirements as well. I want to go back, maybe dig a little bit deeper into the requirements and make sure I'm hitting all those. Again, for a simple skill, it's most of those requirements, they're just on like one page, pretty easy to follow. But you want to ask yourself, did I write all of the messages that I need? Did I write them in a way? Did I include the information I needed that's actually required? So again, with something like reminders, you actually need to tell the person twice in that scenario that they how to when the reminder is and what it's for, what time it is, and then how to cancel it. One example. So then you're gonna want, while you're designing, it's a smart idea to kind of write a test plan, or at least go from the storyboards to write the test plan. And let's say it's smart to work backward from maybe the kind of experience you want the customer to have. So once you draw a line essentially through these storyboards, let me go back to these storyboards. So draw a line through some of these experiences that you're going to string together to make that one session, and then write a test plan according to that until you feel like you've kind of drawn a line through all of these storyboards, or most of the really important ones, and then you've hit like your functions for your functional testing or your QA test plan as well. And then, so it's a good idea to do that and have the designer involved in that. And of course, if you're doing all of it, you're also the designer. But then we want to also make sure we put in, while we're designing, all kinds of robust utterances that we would expect somebody to say to use this. And we want to make sure those are supported before we go to certification, because the certification tester might use all kinds of vocabulary at that point to interact with the skill. And then you'll probably also discover in beta, people use different vocabulary to interact with your skill that mean the same thing. I was trying to come up with an example the other day, and I was telling Joe and Justin, like, water. Wait, what else would somebody say to ask for water? And I sat there and thought about it. Make it rain, or you might, and maybe that was a bad example, but we had trouble thinking of synonyms for like water. Give the cactus something to drink. Make the cactus drink. Drink might be something that we
use
put
the
in
pail.
there.
Right.
Use the pail, use the watering can. That's
Quench.
a good one if somebody's off.
Quench the thirst.
Do the do. I mean, there could be like you can have fun with this, and it's I think also this is a really simple example. So obey the thirst. I like that one. Trade less. Yes.
Oh man, yeah. That's part of making the skill be able to surprise and delight your customers by having some interesting synonyms in there for watering. And it'll just understand and do the do in that case, but actually figure out what that means, and instead of going to the fallback intent saying, okay, cool, hey, we've watered your cactus.
Yeah. Right. And Trade Last comment brings up a really good point here, in that involve more people. Make sure that you're involving as many people as you can when you're coming up with all of these different synonyms and different ways to say a specific intent.
Right, and all kinds of people, and we talked about last time involving people in the beta test with different accents, because Alexa hears them differently, and not only that, people of different ages, different backgrounds, different experiences with Alexa, expert users, maybe like your colleagues or your coworkers like us, and then your kids, or some your grandma, your mother. You want to make sure you're hitting all kinds of users, because we have so many different kinds of players potentially. So yeah, you'll find that they all talk to Alexa differently.
Yeah, and you might have to add strange words into your interaction model. Right. Like where I'm from, people say wooder, like WOODER. So that might be something you have to add, right? It might make sense for you to add in words that don't necessarily make sense if you're just reading out the script.
Right, and Alexa might hear those things differently. Like somebody who says wooder, I can't even say it because that's not my accent, but to them they're saying water. I've never actually tried, for example, like there's this weird Washingtonian accent that not all Washingtonians have, where they say "warsh" in Washington. I've never tested on Alexa whether she understands that. I think she does, but I don't have my device plugged in right now. I have all my power outlets taken right now. Again, do your due diligence at different people using it. And then do one more audit. If you made a checklist for yourself early, do a run through of your checklist, make sure you've tied up all the loose ends. But with games specifically, another word of advice is it's especially important in games to cover all kinds of crazy use cases that you can think of, and just expect that players of games specifically will tend to try to take the game to its limit in some way. They will try to mess with you. I have a good example of that I can talk about. The first time I ever tested a prototype of a previous simulator skill, I had tested, and then we took it out of the skill store after we ran the test because it served its purpose. But this was also a simulator game where you're simulating being stranded in the middle of nowhere and having to, build yourself back up, feed yourself, etc., etc. And you wake up, of course, in the middle of nowhere without any clothes on, kind of naked and afraid style. And the first player I tested this with absolutely refused to get dressed, refused to go hunting so she could make clothes. And she just wanted to stay naked the whole time. She didn't want clothes, and she could not advance in the game naked. And that really frustrated her. And it's a prime example of like people try to take these things to the extremes. Like I've mentioned earlier that, I used to play The Sims when I was in middle school, and who didn't, when they play The Sims, try to see how many children you could have? Like, can I have 20 children? Is that possible? Or can I kill everybody in town? Will it stop generating NPCs at some point? So people will try to mess with you, and just anticipate them trying to push it to the extremes and ask to do things that you can't do. So it's just think about that kind of stuff, because in testing, they're going to try to do it. And even if you don't accommodate somebody with a feature, you can accommodate them by just pointing to a correct response that maybe you already have written. So these will all come up even after you launch. You'll find people doing things with your skill that you didn't expect. So.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, when you're in certification, if you have done all of these steps as thoroughly as you possibly can up to this point, you're actually not going to have that much design work in certification. It's mostly going to be some code work. And if you're doing major rewrites at this time, something probably terribly wrong. I'm sorry for that. Maybe you missed a big chunk of policy requirements or certification, whatever it is. But that's why we do all of this work ahead of time. But typically you should not be rewriting your script or design very much when you're in this process. However, the feedback that does affect design that you will get from certification often incrementally improves the customer experience. For example, a help message, or leaving the stream open after you've asked the customer a question, or bugs that they find, which we'll talk about finding bugs in certification later. But these are all like incremental improvements to the CX, not any major rewrite or anything like that. So you're done at that point with design.
And it's if certification does happen to find some edge case that you haven't found, that's a good thing, right? They found it before your customers. You just want to try to minimize that from happening. They can be very, very good in finding those edge cases that maybe you haven't anticipated. But try to do as much QA as possible before that, just to save yourself some time.
Exactly. TradeLast has a really great example in here I want to call out is you see this happen in other spaces, which is you don't account for all of your users, all your types of users, and you don't account for edge cases. I'm going to say edge cases because the things that he lists are actually not edge cases at all. These are half the population. But like he gives this example of a talking scale program to give words about weight loss and things like that. Well, that assumes the scale knows who you are, but the scale was designed by a group of the same person, being men, and it didn't really account for like pregnant women using the scale. So that's a really great example. This happens pretty frequently. So yeah, let's talk about QA and beta testing. We wanna let's see. Yeah, we want to beta test however we do it, whether it's a prototype or whether we run a full beta test on device. We want to prepare a lot of acceptable a lot of utterances, all of these things that we talked about, and then also you want to test your skill across all of your available locales. That's really important. What typically comes up like code-wise when you're going across locales, Justin and Joe? What are the gotchas there?
So one of them was pointed out in chat by A. Witters and VoiceDev UK, where you might have entirely different phrases in a locale in order to say something, in order to have that intent. So that's certainly one thing, and that's not like quite code, right? That's on the interaction model side. But yeah, I mean that's certainly something to consider. The other thing is like one of the functional requirements for opting into automatic locale distribution is like that you don't have account linking, because the expectation there is that you have some kind of locale specific content that you're going to be accessing, right? So anywhere where you have content on your backend that would be different based on the locale, you're going to want to check that in the request. I don't know, what other examples do you?
Yeah, going back to your point where you're talking about the what A. Winters brought up with the greeting, like in the case of My Cactus, we don't really have any slots that we need to fill, so we're able to do any adjustments there in the front end to the model to have those things basically add another utterance to one of our intents. But if we were using slots, in that case, we could use entity resolution to define those slots. And so in that case, when you define entity resolution, you have two parts. You have your front end and your back end. So in your front end, you define and map your synonyms together. And then in your back end code, you would have to go through and check the result values and see what the user said versus what it mapped to. So that would be one way that you would have to do that, and to be able to keep track of what they said and be able to respond in kind.
Yeah, and that actually is like a really nice thing, because you can respond in the customer's own words that they've used,
right,
to talk to you if that's relevant. So it's nice where you don't get into a situation where you're kind of correcting the way that the customer is speaking. You're speaking the same exact language.
Right. And that's funny, I always tell people, humans have been speaking or trying to communicate with each other for as long as we've been, like, even pre-Homo sapiens, we communicated with we've been doing this for thousands of years. Alexa has been doing this for like 8 years. We're the experts on how we talk. The customer is always right, because they've got about 12,000 years of experience on Alexa, over Alexa. So we want to trust that the customer is saying what they mean and that they know what they're talking about and how to communicate. We want to communicate on their level as best we can. TradeLast asked a good question. Let me scroll up.
Yeah.
How often do you beta a skill really early, well before full functionality, just to prove out viability of a unit of functionality? I actually do this pretty frequently. I like to come up with the core flows of the skill and test that prototype right away before I really have the rest of the meat of the skill, especially if it's a kind of flow or a design that I've never done before, or I haven't done that often, or a lot of stuff together that doesn't normally play together, like maybe some dynamic data and things like that. I test that stuff pretty early. Sometimes I do like a paper prototype even and just read back and forth with my colleagues or somebody I know to double check that it flows. And then if you're concerned about like technical implementation, I tend to expedite the design on something that has to do with a technical implementation, so then the developers can right away start testing that. And then I can go back and work on other parts of the skill while they are waiting for me. So they can test that while they're waiting for me. So I would say anytime you're unsure or you haven't done something before, and it's, of course, like if it's a core component of your skill, just do that first and don't even worry about the rest of the, I don't want to call it window dressing, but at that point, it's window dressing. I don't need to do the badging messages. I have a lot of experience with badging, not so much with this other thing over here, for example.
Then, Alison, when you're not doing paper prototypes, do you like to use the Adobe tool, or do you work with the engineers to go and build out a little bit of prototype and then use it on an Alexa device? Like, what's your preference, or both?
That depends. Actually having a little bit of a power problem right now, so I might unhook for a second. But to answer that really quickly, if I have a technical question or if there is some question about technical implementation, I would go straight to code, but otherwise I would do a code-free prototype if at all possible, depending on how much time it would take. But yeah, if you have a question about implementation, it's good to do it in code, but otherwise you could just go with a code-free prototype. Or if it's faster for you to do the code instead of like use XD, that's cool too. All right, I apologize. I'm gonna shuffle around for a second because my computer is plugged in, but it says it's dying, so I'm gonna resolve that. So. And I believe it's time to talk about testing anyway, so I'll let Joe and Justin take it away.
All right. Well, yeah, how to test. And actually, VoiceDev here has a great testing suggestion too. So we've got a lot of different ways that we can test. We've got with a web browser for web API skill, where we could just, use our standard development tooling in our browser of choice and, resize the screen, making sure that it responds appropriately. But then, if you have access to a device, you certainly want to be testing on the device end to end and not bypassing the speech recognition, right? Because we've already talked about a lot of different examples of where speech. Am I lost?
Sorry, Joe. When I hid Allison's camera for her to be able to, mess around with her setup, I didn't realize that it would mute you too, even though your camera was in view.
Yes.
Aww.
Yeah. All right. I don't know exactly what was heard here, but
we were talking about testing your
yes,
device on testing your skill on multiple devices.
Yes. Yeah. So certainly start with the simulator, right? That's a really easy way to test. But it's worth noting, like, there are some differences in the way that the simulator behaves to a device. For instance, you're not going to have a reprompt when you're working with the simulator in the console. In fact, a reprompt would probably be very annoying as a developer. So the kind of session management works a little bit differently there. But it's a great tool to be able to try different viewport profiles if you have APL visuals. You can make sure that those visuals respond appropriately with commands end to end, starting from the intent, at least. And you can check to make sure like the context in your skill is working. With Web API, we have something very similar where um, we, instead of using the developer console, we can test the visual side of it in a web browser, which is pretty nice. But really, a lot of the problems we've talked about so far in this stream have to do with speech recognition. And that's something you're going to have to use a real Alexa device, or as Voice Dev brought up earlier, you can use your smartphone and use the Alexa mobile app in order to test that automatic speech recognition, translation into intent, translation into your skill request and to your skill response. So that's a great way to try out those core utterances, making sure that it works for different people in different contexts. And then you can scale that with the beta testing tool. So some placeholder values for your testing description and those, your skill description. And then you can start inviting people, family, friends, other developers, uh, you know, whoever you have access to invite, who will give you feedback, like good feedback, right? You want to make sure everything's working for them from a functional level, but also that it is fun to play or is useful, depending on the kind of skill you're making.
Yes, and to your point, Joe, like useful feedback is important, right? Like if you have a beta tester that just says it was good and doesn't expand as to why it was good, or oh, I didn't like it. It's like, well, why? Like, trying to find like somebody who gives great quality feedback is a challenge in and of itself. And so, trying to find those people who really like dive into an issue and really are well articulate in their thoughts as to why they like something versus why they dislike something is important. And as soon as you find those people, it's important to hold on to them and keep asking them, because they're going to give you a lot of great feedback and help you make a better product.
Yeah, a thing I learned in a culinary class in school actually was to not jump to a conclusion of I like or dislike a thing. That kind of puts you into a specific mindset where really you want to try to evaluate that thing for what it is. Like, you know calling out the different parts of it is more useful to the developer than like just being like, yeah, I like this. And yeah, voice dev brings up a good point here as well. ASR is king. And when you are typing into the console, you are bypassing that speech recognition step. You're bypassing kind of half of the interaction model almost. And things might be interpreted differently in the way you type versus the way you say things, right? Ultimately, Alexa services are going to be uh, in charge of the the intent that something that's said gets routed to, right? There's a few different steps in there.
Yeah, and that's one of those.
Yeah, my
those
camera got
things.
weird.
Yeah, I don't know. It did that last stream too. I don't know why, but what was I gonna say? And this is another point where, like, if you're doing anything that's slot based, it's important to do and use entity resolution. What you can do with entity resolution, in addition to mapping known synonyms together, is you can also create logging that captures like what values that were interpreted. So every time you use entity resolution in the request that gets sent to your skill, there is a status indicator, and there's ER success match and ER success no match. So ER success just means that the entity resolution part of the Alexa service was working. And then you either have a match or a no match. Match means it matched to one of your items in your list of synonyms. No match means that it didn't match. So that means the user said something that you didn't predict. And so if you log that information to CloudWatch or something, you can monitor that and see and identify phrases in the ASR that are being interpreted in a particular way, and you can figure out what to do with those. And so that can help you constantly update and improve your model even after the skill has gone live. So, and I'm now seeing that Alison's screen has gone completely white. I don't know if you're, and did Alison lose power? She's frozen. I think we did. Let's see. Yes. Oh, was that directed at me? I'm sorry. My mind has gone white. So in Japanese, in Japanese, when like you've like forgotten something, or like you're in the middle and you lose. In English, we have a phrase called "my train of thought is I lost my train of thought." In Japanese, when in the same sense, when you forget something, you just say "my mind has gone white." Kind of think of it as a piece of paper, and like all the writing on the paper disappeared, and so like as soon as I see the whiteout of the screen here, I'm just like that came to mind, and I'm like, what? So. Yes, it is. Let's see. I can. Uh-oh. Let's see. Oh, is it because the Skype source? Yes. Yeah. Okay. So, can speak, Joe. See if it.
Am I back? Hello.
Can you all hear Joe?
Say hi in chat.
Hello.
Great. Better. All right. Thank you. Yeah. So we wanted to test specifically the interactions on a Fire TV versus the interactions on an Echo Show, and there are some differences because the Fire TV, you don't have a touch screen there, right? So there is a different method of input. APL does a good job of kind of trying to bridge the gap between different kinds of input, whether it's a click or a remote press or a touch event. With Web API, you have to create that yourself. So if you want to handle Fire TV remote, you have to actually respond to those key presses that Fire TV remote generates. Likewise, you might have that same kind of functionality existing on Echo Show, but you don't have key presses. Instead, you have touch events only. So, if you are building something for Web API, definitely consider those things. And then also consider the kind of device you're on in terms of what kind of microphone does it have. Some Fire TVs don't have a microphone array. They can't, work with far field technology. And the customer has to interact by pressing the button on the remote. And this has design implications as well as technical implications, where you might want to provide a different kind of hint to the customers on those devices. And, Web API does give you that tool, like the tool to be able to determine what kind of mic that device has. So, if that matters for your UX, certainly take that into account. Like, one of the things we did on the Cactus skill was change the response on television devices, so that we actually changed the way that the session works, so that you can kind of keep the screen visible and it won't pop up the grayed out the grayed out screen overlay with the press the mic button UX, just because we think it's nicer to look at the cactus. And yeah, TradeLast brings up a point. Testing on every screen on a real device is difficult without one of everything. Absolutely. Even on the devices they have, behavior on device for simulator isn't always consistent. Yeah, simulator, definitely use the simulator to test across the range of devices. And then definitely test on some kind of device. Ideally, if you're building multimodal skills, you would have a multimodal device, but I understand that that's not always the case. So, if in doubt, like definitely use the smartphone app, the Amazon Alexa app, to do testing of the utterances and make sure that works. One of the nice things about certification is they will test across a number of different screen devices. So, while there are maybe some runtime differences, like that's improving all the time between the simulator and real physical devices. So, you can generally rely on the simulator, and then you will always have certification that will test the actual screen devices as well. If you have access to a multimodal device, though, definitely test on that. In addition to the simulator for different viewport profiles, and yeah.
Yes, sorry. I'm trying to get in touch with Allison to see if she's going to be able to jump back on. But in the meantime, I did get the PowerPoint presentation off of our off the network, so I've got that up. So now we've got the presentation. So I guess we've got about 10 minutes, so I think we should just continue on. So I think we were just wrapping on the test methods. So we got a few more things left to cover through here, and I think
this slide here, you have to test on a device for Web API. There is no simulator for that. If you are testing in a browser, you're not going to be able to work with the voice side of things. If you need a device for that and you want to build some Web API, I highly recommend picking up a Fire TV stick. It lets you go even deeper into testing. And I'm going to post a link to a blog post I wrote about different ways to test for Web API skills specifically.
Cool. So yes, make sure that you test on a device for Web API. While you can test in the browser, it's good to test on the device. Didn't we run into some problems where we had some permissions issue with our CloudFront or something of that nature? So like when we would launch the skill, you would get a permission denied.
Oh no, that only happened because I was using ngrok and it was expiring.
Okay, cool. All right, so yes, now we've got some common failures. Like these are things that you should try to avoid when submitting your skill for certification, so that way it goes smoother and you decrease the amount of round trip between submitting your skill and certification. So I just dropped a link in the chat for the policy. This should help. And okay, Joe dropped one in for Web API for Games. So this is a different link. So anyway, this link has the outlines various policy things. But here are some of the reasons that you would fail. One such thing is like failure to indicate that the stream is open. So what is the stream? The stream is the microphone. So when you have your skill and you like say something, or you prompt the user to do something, and then you don't ask a question and the stream is open, meaning that the microphone's opening, listening for user input, that's going to be an automatic fail. The certification team will fail and tell you that you left the stream open, you didn't indicate that it was open, and you didn't ask for a question. The one exception to that is if you're opening up the microphone to play some music. So if you have like a music skill in that particular instance, you don't need to ask a question because the result is that, you know, you have started playing music. And then, oh, did you have something to add, Joe?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna continue on. Yeah, like make sure that your built-in intents are being handled in appropriate ways. You know, make sure that stop makes sense for your skill. Make sure that help is contextualized. That cancel will cancel an action or exit the skill, depending. Um, yeah, and there are some specific cert requirements to check out for those if you are having issues or have questions. And I'll post a link to those docs.
Thanks, Joe. I was going to go grab them, but if you have them handy, go for it. Yes. So, you know, that's the other thing to think about is, you know, that contextual help, being able to give, you know, guidance, you know, as the, you know, relevant to what's taking place in the game is, or whatever skill that you've created, is going to really help make the experience better. It might take a little bit more effort on your end because you have to make your help intent be aware of the current situation in the game. With the Mic Cactus skill presently, we don't have contextually aware help. However, we could make the help be contextually aware because we have that get status function. So what we could do is we could actually, from the help intent, call get status, get the status, and then based upon that status, craft a helpful message where we would say something along the lines of like, oh, hey, yeah, your cactus is in this state. Like you should do this, 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 and this to make it better. Right. So we could create that help method to or function, sorry, the help intent to be more contextual. We just, you know, haven't done that yet, but we could totally do it. We have the plumbing in place. So anyway, it's, you just want to make sure that your help is contextual. So, yeah. And then, you know, lastly, just making sure that like you make sure that all of your testing materials are, you know, ready to go and set up properly, especially if you have any sort of like account linking, you know, and, you know, you want to make sure that you have like a account that they
Test
can log
account.
in, and you give them the information and you provide them a way to be able to clear that information out and start fresh because, you know, there might be more than one person testing. They might have to test in multiple locales. And Joe was talking about account linking with multiple locales earlier. So like a way to do that. And so you want to be, you know, as descriptive as possible with your testing instructions. So, all right, let's continue on. Let's see. So another thing that you need to be aware of and to think of is that certification is not QA. So while they will, and we talked about this earlier, like they will identify problems that you have with your skill and they'll point out policy things, they're not your QA testers. And so if they do find something, great, you can go back and you know, fix those. And I think it was Joe earlier who said if certification finds a problem, you know, it's great because that they got it before your customers do, but you know, they're not your QA team. So you need to have gone through and QA'd the skill, gone through the beta test, done your due diligence in order to be able to get this through. And so I think that, you know, just keep in mind that, you know, certification is not your QA test team. So, and it sounds like Allison's back. Allison, are you there? No? Okay. Let's continue on. So, yes, so, you know, you'll need to create your testing instructions, the sample data, the account, anything that they need, and just make sure that when you define your skill name and description, that your skill name isn't violating any policy, any intellectual property, and that, you know, they meet the character limits as far as, you know, I don't remember what character limits there are for each of the profiles, I think Allison might be in the
Can
background.
you hear me?
Yes,
Oh,
yes,
hey.
we can.
Yay!
I think there might be an echo.
I have a mystery. My laptop said I had 54% battery, and then it shut off and will not turn back on. So y'all are on my iPad now. Sorry about that.
I think it's probably a thermal issue. It probably overheated because I've had problems with my computer in the past. So I think you'll just have to wait for it to cool down a bit, and then
Gosh,
hopefully...
it's like freezing cold in here too. What the heck? Anyway.
This is episode 11, the cursed episode.
Right? Or really, it's just me, but...
No worries.
Anyway, continue.
Yes.
Don't mind me.
So we're talking about how to prepare for certification. I don't know if you're able to see the deck. I've got it up on my screen, but
yeah,
we were just talking about like making sure that that you don't go over the limits of your character, or sorry, of your character limits for the different descriptions. So things might get cut off, and so that's not good. You want to make sure that your name doesn't violate any IP or anything of that nature. So things that you should have ready for when you prepare to submit your skill. And let's see. I have 3 mice in front of me, so I'm trying to figure out which thing to control is.
The note about violating IP, yeah, certainly don't. Oh yeah, here we go. We're going to talk about it here on this slide. Make sure all the intellectual property you're using is yours. You don't want to put a bunch of work into a skill to realize that there's no license for you to be able to use that content. This is something certification could reject you for, and if you don't own the IP, then there's you really shouldn't be using it within a skill.
Right.
Yeah, and for the uninitiated, that could be as simple as like music that you mixed in, iconography, even logos, even mention of like another company, and it also includes presenting yourself, your developer name, as representing a company when you don't as well. So there's some examples actually up on the policy guidelines about, you're not going to put Amazon or Alexa in your name kind of thing, or in certain ways. Some names are more acceptable than others when they use Alexa, but yeah, that even extends to your skill name and even skill description information as well.
Yeah, and I would highly recommend staying away from anything with the word Alexa in it, just because, like, you might have a reason, or there might be some way that it does get published, but then in the future that might not, and so just avoid it. Like say you get it approved, right. Then you make an update, and then it gets flagged as, oh hey, this policy has changed, and so now you have to change. So it's just a matter of just avoid that hassle altogether, and just don't use any of those words or names in your skill name, and you should be fine.
Yeah, there is some branding guidelines which I can post if you do want to dig into this more.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. And then also
yeah, and also make sure you're following the right IP rights for the software you're using too, right? Make sure that the license is permitted for the way you're building out your skill, and all of those things too.
Right. Yes, and then you should also think about, like, is the skill related to healthcare, finance? Is it child directed? There's a whole bunch of different things that you have to worry about in each one of those categories, and there are policies there, and if you do any of those things, you need to make sure that you're following the policy guidelines. Otherwise you will get rejected, and you'll have to go through and adjust those things. And so again, if you know about those from the beginning, you can get a head start and not have to worry about getting rejected over missing some policy. I think it was Joe earlier that said, or maybe it was Alison, somebody said, like, all the research that you do, a couple hours of research saves you a couple weeks of dev, because it's like, oh, now we have to go and re-architect and rebuild, and so
yeah. And this also applies to artwork, right? Make sure you are abiding by the license
Yes.
and the fair use of the assets that you are using. Trey Last gives a point of with crediting clip art. Make sure that that's done in a way that is understood by the end customer.
Right. Or make it clear that the artwork is copyright you.
Yes.
You created it. Also, that'll prevent somebody else from ripping off your artwork, possibly. But yeah, make that clear because they will ask.
Yeah. If in doubt, consult a lawyer.
Yes.
Right.
Yep. And if you're doing anything with in-scale purchasing, there's a whole bunch of policy things you need to guidelines that you need to follow there. There's also sets of intents that you need to define. You have to, for instance, like, if you have an in-scale purchase, that needs to be able to exist throughout, ownership of, basically for the lifetime of the skill. If you do a subscription, you have to have a free trial. Like, there's all these different things that you must adhere to, and so you'll need to familiarize yourself with those policies. And then also you need to make sure that you're testing your skill for security, especially in the case where you are collecting any sort of customer information. If you do store customer information when you submit the skill, you do have to declare that is something that you're doing. You have to provide a privacy policy and some other information. Otherwise, your skill will be, rejected in certification. And so that's another part where, if in doubt, contact a lawyer and try to figure out what privacy policy you need to draw up. But in addition to that, you also need to make sure that you're handling their data in a secure fashion. All right.
And my dog sees my neighbor now, so she's gonna cry about it.
Nice. Well, we're almost.
I panned over to say hello to my neighbor briefly, but yeah, that's what she's crying about.
we're
another fellow trailer dweller.
We're about to wrap up here, so
yeah.
So yes, we're I can't believe it, but we are. This is episode 11, and we are coming up on episode 12, the final episode. I know it says launch party and play session. We haven't submitted to certification yet, so we'll be doing something a little bit different on that stream, but we will be playing the skill.
And in case you haven't heard, it takes longer than 24 hours to get through certification. Actually, that's worth noting.
Yes.
The typical time it takes to get through certification, I know it can be short as a couple of weeks, but don't count on it. Count on maybe double that time, and then maybe give yourself a week or two to address any changes at the very least, best case scenario. So submit a lot earlier.
Yeah.
Especially if you're trying to meet a deadline.
Yeah, my mantra is submit early, submit often. And for those of you who were paying, who participated in the Alexa Skills Challenge for Alexa Conversations, at the beginning and end of every stream I did, I know Gold Zulu loved my pitch, but I would always tell people like, hey, you have X number of days, and you should submit your skill if you haven't, because there's that little bit of time and back and forth between yourself and the certification process. So submit early, submit often, and that should help you. And Gold Zulu says, after all the reminders, I still submitted late. So all right, cool. So yes, next episode, Friday, 10 a.m.
Join us. We're gonna go through the skill. We can play with the skill, and we'll talk about some of those loose ends. Maybe some best practices for your skill description. Also, any other questions and stuff, shoot us a message in the Slack channel or here. And also, you know where to find us. Our handles are at the end of the slideshow as well. Hey, she's really sad that we're leaving now. She's sad that the stream is almost over. So yeah, we'll tie up some loose ends on the next episode. And we'll just celebrate, because you should celebrate when you're done with the skill. Right. You're never really done until you decide not to support it, but you should celebrate when the world gets to interact with your skill. And then hopefully by that time we'll have a way for you to sign up for the beta.
Yes, and so again, if you want to follow along, if you want to look at the code, if you want to look at our design assets, you can go to the link pictured here, alexa.design/my-cactus. And then, yes, up next we'll be playtesting the skill and yeah, opening up our beta. So.
And any questions until Friday, we can answer on the stream on Friday. Shoot any of us a tweet, a message, DM, whatever. And there'll be plenty of time to chat on Friday.
All right.
TBD on our guest whiner for next episode.
Yes, and let's hope your laptop doesn't die or overheat or.
Oh, I'm gonna figure this out. This is ridiculous. Of all the things I got to go right this morning, then the basic thing of like just power somehow failed me.
Well, thank you all for joining us. This has been great
fun. Thanks for joining,
fun.
everybody.
All right. Yes, thank you all for tuning in, and until next time, see you around.
Goodbye.